This is a very special conversation on NDTV with Dr. Salman Akhtar, who's a world-renowned psychiatrist, author of 113 books, someone who has seen US politics for over 50 years, and someone who also writes on a variety of issues. Thank you so much, Dr. Akhtar, for speaking to NDTV. I'm going to come to your book that you've written in just a bit, but let me start by asking you that we're in Pennsylvania, a state that is considered to be pretty much decisive when it comes to the US election results. How do you view the election right now, the issues on which the Indian Americans are set to vote, and most importantly, the American politics right now as it stands?
Let me answer your comment or respond to it in reverse order. One, about the current American politics. I've been in this country now 51 years, and I've never seen and never experienced this country as so divided socially, politically, and such. The country is actually really, really divided, and very strongly in terms of ideology, in terms of feelings, in terms of sense of identity, belonging, philosophy of life, attitude towards minorities, etc., etc. So it's a very strongly emotional election. All elections are emotional. All elections are fundamentally divisive because they say elect A or elect B.
Right.
But those divisions are ideational. Now the divisions are powerfully emotional and almost vitriolic and potentially violent. So it's a very, very powerful and significant moment in American politics.
There hasn't been any violence till now, though there are expectations that the result may coincide with some acts of it. I will come to that in a bit. But first, in terms of the Indian American community, you are one of the strongest members of that, very illustrious member of the community. How has it shaped up in the last couple of years? They've grown significantly. They've doubled in the last 10 odd years. They are powerful in all metrics, economically, socially. Politically, are they getting the voice that they've been wanting to for some time? Are they now part of the political representation that the Indian American community has been seeking for some time?
I think the answer is unfortunately a little complex. One is that when we say Indian American community, we are being a little wishful in viewing that community as a homogeneous. The fact is, even within Indian American community, there are cracks. Cracks, for instance, between Sikhs and non-Sikhs.
Right.
There have been incidences that we don't necessarily need to get into in Canada, in the United States, and in the history in the last 20, 30, 40 years, which have caused a very subtle but painful crack between Sikhs and Hindus. Of course, the Muslims and Hindus from old time, their partition, etc. So there are all kind of cracks in there. Plus, also, whether even within the Hindu community, a relatively moderate, secular, liberal, left-leaning Hindu community versus a Hindutva community. So that what we call Indian community has Sikh community, Muslims who are Indian really from the heart, Muslims who may have other kinds of empathies and sympathies.
Okay.
And then Sikhs who are in some ways broken-hearted and suspect and also angry and resigned. So that we have a collage and a mosaic of Indian community.
Yes.
On one hand, is quite splintered. On the other hand, because the immigration in this country was tilted towards the educated,
yes,
and the potentially affluent or the affluent to be.
Yeah.
Therefore, one thing that binds them together is money. Most Indian people are more affluent than other ethnic groups.
Yeah.
And a quality that they share with the Chinese, I think, and with the Jews of hard work, industry, value of education,
yes,
family cohesion. In that way, Indian community can be seen as one.
Yeah.
In some ways not as one, in some ways as one.
Yeah.
In the latter issue, I think unfortunately or understandably, the interest that drives this whole country anyway, and I think this side of the Indian interest is money and taxes and revenues and such. And in that way, they might lean one way where they feel that it's going to be more advantageous financially for them.
Okay. That's an important insight you gave. You're right about the fact that the Indian American community is affluent. The median household income is about $150,000, which is more than double the average national income. But there are 2-3 aspects of what you said which I want to delve into further. Of course, Indian American community is not a monolith group. There are several aspects to it. And let's talk about those, whether the impact of what's happening in the West Asia crisis has any bearing on how Indian Muslims, who are of course now Indian Americans voting in this. Is that an impact you see? Right now in this election, there's a very large prominent grouping in Michigan of Muslim voters. A lot of them are from India. Do you see that having some sort of an impact?
I think so. I think the Muslims in this country, including Indian Muslims, Pakistani Muslims also, but including Indian Muslims, I think are very wary of both parties. But because of the relatively one-sided support of United States in the Middle East conflict. But I think that they are somewhat more wary of the Republicans and more wary of their candidate, because they feel, and I think rightly so, that if the Republicans come in power, especially their candidate, then they might give almost carte blanche to certain powers in Middle East, which would be disadvantageous and hurtful and disenfranchising for the Muslims. So in that way, in their larger solidarity with Muslims, I think the Muslim vote will paradoxically go to the Democrats, although they are not happy with them either.
Okay. What about the factor when it comes to the Panun issue? It's an issue that hasn't had an impact in terms of the India-US relationship, as it shouldn't, because it's a specific case. But from a voter point of view, from the Sikh community point of view, help us understand that, is there some bearing on the Sikh voting patterns here in the United States?
I don't know. The fact is, I don't know. But what I do know is that there is a quiet, painful and subterranean schism that has evolved. And it is since 1984, or when, not 84, 84, right? Yeah. So it has since then lasted. It gets healed over and sealed over, more sealed over than healed over. I mean, obviously the fact that Mr. Manmohan Singh became the Prime Minister of India, etc., had kind of both tokenism as well as actual, both healing effects, just like Mr. Obama's election in this country. But I think there is a crack. And I don't think that affects the voting pattern. It may not in this country, I don't think so, because that has less pertinence. I mean, the recent scandals are too recent and too ill understood, actually, frankly. Too ill understood, too vague, and not their knowledge and their influence is not that pervasive. So I don't think that has any effect.
The other aspect I wanted to ask you about is the wooing of the Hindu Americans here, particularly by the Republican Party. Donald Trump has mentioned that on multiple occasions. How do you see that having a bearing, again, on voting preferences, given the fact that the Indian community here has predominantly been a Democrat stronghold? Studies seem to indicate that that is now changing. Even if it may not be a very significant trend, the fact that it is changing and the backdrop that Donald Trump is wooing this affluent class of voters who are, in a position to become important donors and so on and so forth. How do you see that?
See, one of the common ploys, not only with Mr. Trump, but with all politicians, including politicians in our own country, is to make people feel that they are somehow endangered. And once you convince them they are endangered, then you can offer to rescue them and such. So, for example, the email or whatever Mr. Trump sent around to Happy Diwali, but it portrays, first of all, it conflates Indians with Hindus. That's one potential problem. The second is that it also begins with their endangerment of a minority in Bangladesh, which has little to do with, with Hindus here, so to speak, Indian Hindus here. But this idea that somehow Indian Hindus are in danger in this country, I don't think so at all. I don't think, I see no danger. But to make them and to conflate the Bangladeshi Hindus with Indian Hindus and then Indian Hindus with the Indian Hindu Americans. This conflation is a trickery to create a sense of victimhood from which now we can promise to rescue them. The fact is, Indian Hindus are very well off here and very well taken care of and industrious, proud, hardworking, and prouder by the day.
Yes.
With the positive sides of Mr. Modi's government.
Right.
Please understand, Mr. Modi has his own, I think, domestic side we have to question. But he has also done some very good things. There's no doubt about this. Brought power to the country,
right.
Fame to the country, affluence to the country. The Hindu-Muslim problem, minority problem, Hindu-Christian problem, right. I think those are problems
right.
and weaker parts of what is happening there.
Okay. Let's now shift focus and talk about your latest book. And I saw this before the interview, and I wanted to ask you first of all, talk to our viewers. Tell us the reason why you've chosen this title, and of course your brother is on the cover as well of it. Tell us why is it that you've come up with this title? It says Ghar Ka Bhedi in it, and because for the longest we know Ghar Ka Bhedi in a separate context completely. Yes. You tell us.
Yes. Well, I'm glad that you talk about literature and poetry, because I know much more about literature and poetry than about politics. So thank you for bringing me to a safer ground. I come from, as you know, from a literary family.
Yes.
And my father was a prominent writer and poet and film songwriter also. My uncle, my grandfather, my brother. So these are interesting personalities, interesting poets, and somewhat different kinds of poets and different kind of people. So as a person with some distance and yet deep belonging to all four of them, I thought this would be a good thing to write about their poetry and slightly about their character. I've tried to not get into too much in the character and such, but it was an interesting exercise. The name of the book is borrowed actually, which I acknowledge in the preface, from an article by my mother, who had written an article in 1950 about my father, naming that book, that article. There.
Okay, but the fact that you put your brother on the cover, would you like to talk about it? There is Javed Akhtar on the cover here. The reason why you've put that, could you tell us more about that?
Look, the cover is drawn by the press. They drew the cover. And these are all four people. And the cover is not only Javed Akhtar, cover is also Janisar Akhtar, Majaz, and Mustar Khairabadi.
Yeah.
And the way the cover is designed, I think, is very interesting. And that is that it's a kind of juxtaposition of time. So the grandfather is far behind, and my brother is right in front.
Yeah.
So passage of time and generations.
Yes.
It's also interesting to me that the designer, and credit goes to the designer, has used more sketches for the grandfather and my brother, and photos for my uncle and my my father.
Right.
Different methods and different means.
Lastly, I want to ask you this: that you're a prolific writer.
Yes.
You write Urdu and poetry.
Yes.
Ghazals, there's a book on ghazals as well that is there.
Yes.
How come you've been away from Bollywood, and how come Bollywood hasn't diced you till now?
That's a good question. I mean, parts of Bollywood are in me, of course,
Yes.
because my father was a songwriter in movies. My brother is a prominent writer. My nephew, niece, and everything. My son is in Hollywood and very successful director and editor and such. So some acting and some film is inside of me. But you know, influences happen in childhood, and I took a different path. I took a path towards medicine. And from medicine, I kind of went into psychiatry, then psychoanalysis, and now more and more into writing. So in a way, I'm in a medical poetry business, or poetic medicine business.
Poetic medicine itself is a completely different domain, which I fear I know nothing about. But thank you so much, Dr.
Yes,
Akhtar, for
thank you.
speaking to NDTV, for taking out the
Yes,
time.
thank you. Thank you for having me.